Setting healthy boundaries is just one aspect of learning to be more assertive in our day-to-day communications. And there's some underlying fundamental principles, and then there's some elements to stating our boundaries and actually communicating them to other people. So in the first half of this video, I'm going to cover some fundamental principles, and in the second half of this video, I'm going to cover the format for making a boundary statement. So if you want to learn to be more assertive and set healthy boundaries, the first thing you need to do is you need to get really clear on your core values. You need to get really clear on what you want in your life. And equally as important as that, you need to get really clear on what you don't want in your life. So if you've never sat down to write out like what it is you're sick and tired of in your life and refuse to tolerate any longer, and what you're missing, what you're striving for in your life, what you really want more of, the kind of people you want to be surrounded by, the environment you want to live in, the way you want to spend your time. Like if you haven't clearly written those things down, that's the first place to start. You need to know what you want, because if you don't know what you want, then you won't know what to say no to, because there's hundreds of opportunities and responsibilities that can come at us on a day-to-day basis. And if we don't know what to say no to, we'll constantly be giving all of our time away to other people instead of focusing on what we really want. And at the same time, the better we get at saying no, the more valuable our yes is. Because when we say yes, we're really going to mean it, and it's really going to have some value. Okay? Now, if you haven't done that, there's actually a really great exercise for that in my 5-day assertiveness upgrade training. At the time of this recording, it's free. You can check it out at assertivenessupgrade.com. But more on that later. The next fundamental principle that you need to understand is learning about your internal emotional landscape, particularly your negative emotions, the things that make you angry, the things that you feel resentful about. Learning to understand and even tolerate your negative emotions like anxiety is going to be essential for setting healthy boundaries, because our emotions are basically the decision-making force in our body. And oftentimes we avoid negative emotions like anger, fear, hurt, jealousy, resentment. We kind of press them down and ignore them and pretend they're not there. And ultimately, these emotions are really important signals from our body telling us what's important to us. And they're actually impulse and move our body to act. And anytime you experience negative emotions, your body's telling you to speak up on your own behalf. And oftentimes we press it down and we hide it and we pretend it's not there and we pretend everything's okay. And it keeps us from standing up for ourselves and setting healthy boundaries. And so really getting to know your emotions, the good ones and the bad ones, right? The positive and the negative ones. That's really going to help us understand basically when our body's telling us that we need to set a healthy boundary. And equally as important with that is the next fundamental principle, which is understanding our rights. Now, especially in terms of dealing with emotion, we might wonder what we're allowed, what we're allowed to say, what we're allowed to do, what we're allowed to feel. We often feel guilty, like we have to do things for other people, like it's not right to tell people when we're angry. And not having a clear understanding of what we're allowed to do can kind of prevent us from acting on our own behalf all the time. And in addition to that, it's important to know that healthy boundaries, basically as a side note, are physical, mental, and emotional limitations that are defined by us, right? You define your own limitations. No one else can define them for you. And so once you understand your rights, that makes it a whole lot easier for you to say, hey, this is my physical, mental, and emotional property, without feeling like you're stepping on other people's toes or you've made some sort of social faux pas. And if you want to learn about what those rights are, I actually have another video. I'll try to tag it in here somewhere. It's called How to Be More Assertive by Knowing Your Rights. And once you understand those rights, it makes it really easy for you to define what is yours, especially in those more confusing areas of the mental and emotional property. Physical property, that one's kind of easy. You know, if you just go and decide that a public park is your property and anyone that trods on it is going to have to answer to you, you're definitely going to have to back that up with a little bit of muscle. And I think most of us agree that the boundaries upon the earth in most of the world are very clearly established and they're not up for debate anymore, although there are some places in the world where that's not true. So it's the mental and emotional boundaries that we really need to speak and let other people know what they are in order for them to be known and respected. And that's another important part of understanding your rights, because equally as important as understanding your rights is understanding your responsibilities. And in order for your boundaries that you define completely of your own accord, if you do not speak them to other people, they will not be known. And there's no guarantee that when you speak them, they will be respected. But if you don't tell anyone what your boundaries are, I can guarantee that they're not going to be respected. So the fourth fundamental principle that we need to understand in order to get comfortable with communicating assertively with people is we need to understand our body's sort of unconscious response to conflict. And in a simple way, anytime we approach conflict, we're going to feel some anxiety. And basically our nervous system is telling us that something important to us is at risk, and it's going to motivate us to act. And that means that no matter what, during conflict, you're going to feel a little bit of anxiety. But most of us, if you're watching this video, have learned to be sort of averse to conflict and avoid it. And so in those situations, something a little bit more extreme is happening. Rather than just a little bit of anxiety, your nervous system might actually go into fight-flight mode. And you might go into fight mode, and you might raise your voice and get loud and get a little bit more hostile and aggressive and sort of turn people off, right? And turn people away from you with this sort of like aggressive type of behavior. Or you might go into flight mode, in which case your body, you still might feel really amped up, but your behavior is more retreating and passive and submissive. You might not say anything. You might even make passive-aggressive maneuvers to try to solve your conflict rather than dealing with it directly. There's a number of ways that this can work. But in very extreme cases, especially when trauma is involved, there's sort of like a third nervous system response, and that's freeze and to basically shut down. And you might even slow down might get really quiet. Your voice might become very monotone, and you may say nothing, and you might feel very just kind of like shut down and frozen, like you can't move at all. And so when we become more aware of how our nervous system responds to conflict or negotiation or challenges in our relationships at home and at work, when we can sort of identify what's happening in our body, we can learn to work with it a little bit more. And again, I think the best place to probably start learning about that is through my 5-day assertiveness training at assertivenessupgrade.com. But maybe I'll make a video about that in the future. And then once you've covered those first 4 sort of fundamental principles of self-understanding, it becomes a lot easier to just be assertive and say what's on our mind. And when you are feeling more comfortable in approaching conflict and you are ready to approach someone and set a healthy boundary, it's important to know what to say. And so there's 4 elements to making a boundary statement. And the first part of a boundary statement is to state the issue. When you do this, I feel that. Or when you do that, I feel this. Here's how I feel. Angry, hurt, annoyed, bothered, overwhelmed. And the next part is to state your intention. Now, I mentioned earlier that when you state a boundary, there's no guarantee that it's going to be respected. And it's important to know that you can't force people to do anything they don't want to do. You can never demand things of other people because you're taking away their autonomy and they're going to get defensive. And so the best you can do here is be really honest about your intentions. You may actually wish to control someone else's behavior, and if that's the case, you should let them know because it's going to be obvious to them, right? You're going to start saying things in a certain way that feels manipulative to the other person, even if you're not necessarily trying to be manipulative. If you really want someone to change their behavior, just straight up say it. Hey, I want you to change your behavior, okay? And they might tell you that they don't want to change their behavior, and that's okay, but as long as you're honest, they will then have the opportunity to respond, and they will trust you more because you're being honest rather than hiding your intention to control their behavior. Now, another intention you might have is just to clear the air, just to be heard. You may not need them to even change their behavior. You just want them to hear how their behavior affects you, and that's it. Okay, so those are a couple different intentions you might have. Now, the third part of making a boundary statement is to sort of relate it to your core values, which we talked about earlier. And some of your core values might be your personal sense of safety, your sense of privacy. Some other core values might be valuing respect or being respected in your relationships. Another core value might just be the type of people that you want to surround yourself with. Any of your core values can come into play here. When you do that, I feel this, and I want you to change your behavior because it's really important that I feel respected in my relationships. And then the fourth element of making a boundary statement is to state the boundary and ask that it be respected. Again, I mentioned you cannot demand anything from anyone. And so the best thing to do is to kindly ask that what you want be respected. And so you might say something like, would you be willing to not call me names in the future, right? When you call me names, I feel hurt. And I want you to change your behavior because feeling respected in my relationships is really important to me. Would you be willing to not call me names in the future? And then the person has the opportunity to respond. They can say, no, I'm going to call you names. And then, of course, there's consequences, which might be, sort of severing that relationship as much as you can, distancing yourself from that person, completely cutting them off altogether if they're not willing to respect that boundary, or just, if you're in a situation where someone's treating you that way and you can't get away from them, like in the workplace, you might have to, go to a superior and report them and say, hey, this person they're out of control. They're calling me names. What's going on? So again, we talked about 4 different fundamental principles of self-understanding that allow us to be more assertive and feel more comfortable engaging in conflict and resolving that conflict. And then we talked about the 4 elements of making a boundaried statement. So if you want to learn some more about this stuff, I mentioned it a couple times already. I'd recommend checking out my 5-day assertiveness training at assertivenessupgrade.com. At the time of recording this video, it's free, but it may not always be. And as long as it's available, I recommend checking it out. And if you have any questions or feedback about this video, let me know. And as always, click the like, click the subscribe, leave me a comment, show some love. And until next time, I'm Kevin Hood.